What's up, everybody? Nate here. And the United States' credit rating just got questioned on the global stage again. This time it was from Moody's. They recently looked at the United States' finances and our economy and had some harsh words, essentially putting us into the negative. Now, if you remember just a few months ago, another credit agency called Fitch did the exact same thing to the United States' credit, except for they went one step further and actually downgraded our credit altogether based on rising debt and political instability. And now it looks like it's starting a domino effect amongst all other countries and credit agencies across the world. So let's kind of break down what just happened. So Moody's took a look at our country's finances and it took a look at our debt and our economy, and it decided that our outlook for the future of our economy and our finances is actually going to look more negative than it is positive. It didn't actually go as far as Fitch did just a few months ago to completely downgrade us. It kept us at a AAA rating, which is as high as you can go. Fitch actually dropped us down from AAA to AA+. What that means is now our credit worthiness is not as strong in Fitch's eyes, and it looks like Moody's is kind of leaning towards the same direction, and they gave basically the same exact reasons as to why. The first is rising debt in the United States, but not just rising debt, the inability to not be able to pay this debt off in the future. The United States has around 33 or maybe even $34 trillion and counting on its national debt. That is way more than they could ever probably reasonably pay off. But when you think about debt, who exactly do we owe debt to? Well, we owe debt to a variety of other nations like China and Canada and the UK and Japan and all of these other nations who have bought our treasury bonds and have also loaned us money over the years. Now, as this debt continues to rise, it just gets a lot harder to pay off. Like, think of it this way. If you have $100,000 in credit card debt, your payments are just going to get bigger and bigger every month. So how exactly do you pay that debt off? Well, you can get a different job, you can get a raise, you can get a side hustle until it's finally paid off. Now, you're just one individual. So if you don't pay your credit card debt or if you don't pay your mortgage, you're not going to take down the bank. But imagine if this happened on a grand scale and say millions of Americans suddenly stop paying their mortgage or their credit card bills. That could essentially take down banks because the banks rely on this interest payment and they rely on people repaying their debt. So if suddenly millions of people were unable to pay their debts, the banks could essentially go under. And that is the fear with the United States. The fear is twofold right now. The first has to do with the United States repaying this debt. As long as the United States is able to make its debt payments on time to all of these different countries and all of these different corporations and all of these different entities that it has loaned money to, well, that means that the entire rest of the world continues to get richer and the entire rest of the world continues to see that steady income from the debt that they've loaned to the United States. But as soon as that debt runs out, now all of these different countries who have loaned the United States trillions of dollars, they suddenly don't have an income source to repay all of their own debts in their own countries. Not to mention, with the United States credit going down, that hurts its ability to borrow more money from all of these other countries and all of these individual investors throughout the entire world. It's the exact same thing as, say, like a FICO credit score. You're able to get a loan like a mortgage or an auto loan based on your credit score. If you have a really high credit score, well, that means you pay your bills on time and you have maybe some assets that you can lean on in the case that you suddenly are unable to pay your debts back. So the bank can look at all of your information and say, they're a good borrower, so I can loan them X amount of money because I know that they're going to be able to pay it back. There is a certain trustworthiness that is there. The exact same situation happens on a global stage. These individual credit agencies like Moody's and Fitch and others take into account the finances of a country and the country's economy and all of its debt and instability or stability, right? So they take into all of this into account, and then they figure out if this country is going to be able to pay its debts back. Well, the United States, with it getting downgraded, means that, well, it's getting a lot harder for the United States as a country to pay its debts back. So it's not going to be able to borrow as much money in the future if its credit rating continues to go down. Now, to be completely honest with you, we are nowhere near that just yet, right? We are nowhere near this idea that the United States is not going to be able to borrow money from other countries in the world, and there is one simple reason why. We we currently are the reserve currency of the world, which means around 50 to 60% of all of the money that is used for transactions and just in reserves throughout the world is US dollars. So many countries want to continue to do business with the United States because our money is valuable. And for the most part, our economy is also stable. Our economy is stable in comparison to a lot of these other nations. So all of these different countries want to continue to use our money because it's stable. They know the value isn't going to change overnight versus a lot of other currencies. So that allows them to continue to invest with confidence. And as long as that continues, the United States is able to add on to its debt because it's going to continue to rack up more and more business. But that might not always be the case. And eventually, if the United States is not the reserve currency of the world anymore, well, then that could mean all of its debt and all of its money loses a lot of value. And if its money loses a lot of value, then other countries aren't going to want to hold on to it anymore, and the US has a much more difficult time paying back its debts. That would be a lot more serious of a situation though, because it would mean a tilting or a shift in the global economic model, and it would also mean that the United States is no longer the basically premier superpower of the world anymore. And like I said before, we're not really there yet, but this sort of idea of us coming down from being the biggest superpower of the world from a lot of economists' perspective is starting to happen right now, or has been happening over the last 20 or 30 years or so. And you're probably thinking, so what? So what if the United States isn't able to borrow money from Japan, or it's not able to borrow money from individual investors? The United States can always just print money, right? Well, that may be true, but look at what happened over the last couple of years. The United States printed around $5 trillion in overall stimulus. We're talking about unemployment benefits, we're talking about direct payments to individuals, and a slew of other programs because of the pandemic. Well, that caused near record high inflation. Remember last year, inflation hit a high of around 9.1%. That means that the buying power of every dollar in circulation is going down, and the value of money is also decreasing, meaning you need a lot more money in order to buy all of the same things. So the United States can't just continue to print money without seeing a lot more inflation. So if the US isn't able to borrow money, then it really only has two options. It can print a bunch of money and cause a lot more inflation, or it can increase taxes on its citizens, which pretty much nobody likes. There is technically another solution to this problem that Moody's actually mentioned in its report. They believe that cost cutting could actually prevent the United States from having a lot more debt issues. But the problem is the United States has a lot of political instability that is preventing it from cutting costs effectively. The United States federal government has been shut down a lot over the last decade or so. In fact, earlier this year, we almost had a default on our debt, and the federal government actually went into a full shutdown mode over this fiscal policy and our budget deficit. Budget deficit basically means that we don't bring in enough tax dollars or enough income in general to support all of the debt that we're taking on. So we essentially can't pay our bills anymore. So we just keep borrowing money and borrowing money. Now, we've been able to borrow money, which means that we've been able to pay back our debts, but that number is continuing to grow, which means the United States Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department has to continue to print more money and print more money in order to support this debt. And other countries don't want to just continue to loan us money over and over and over again, considering we're not really able to pay our bills, or it looks like we might not be able to pay our bills because of all of these potential defaults and government shutdown. That is what Moody's is talking about here. They are looking at our political instability, and they're saying the United States is not going to be able to come to an agreement on cost-cutting measures or ways to actually bring down the deficit, or figuring out other ways to bring in additional revenue so that way we can lower our debt. They're saying that the United States, in their eyes, is not going to be able to do that anytime soon, which means their outlook for our country is negative. It's safe to say that printing money and borrowing money and being the reserve currency of the world also equals exponential growth, but at some point it pretty much is just unsustainable. We have seen a bunch of other nations in the past do this exact thing and go through this exact cycle. This is an idea called the changing world order power that Ray Dalio talks a lot about. I've covered this before, and if you want a more in-depth explanation of what exactly the changing world order is, I'll link a video for you in the description below. But basically, nations rise and fall in terms of economics, and right now Ray Dalio believes that the United States is on its decline. It's taken on way too much debt. It doesn't really have a good way to support its military endeavors or its status as the world superpower, because all of this military power and all of this big economy and all of these businesses and people, it all just costs a ton of money. So it doesn't really have a way to pay back a lot of that debt. So it continues to just print money and print money and print money. This is exactly why the United States has seen sort of a contraction when it comes to recessions and the severity of those recessions. We had the Great Recession back in 2008, but then just 10 years later, we also had the 2020 recession. Now, that was a very short recession, but it was a very intense recession for a few months because we had soaring unemployment higher than 2008. And we also had to print trillions of dollars and also lower interest rates just to get ourselves out of it. That is the worry right now from Fitch and Moody's. The United States doesn't have much legislative power to practically and efficiently lower inflation and lower its own debt. Really, the only thing that it can do is to just continue to print money. And eventually, it just becomes unsustainable. The United States just won't be able to pay this debt back at some point, and that means it could potentially go into a default. And it could create some disarray throughout the entire world, and it could create a new world order with a new reserve currency. And this could potentially be from China or maybe Japan. The question that economists haven't really been able to figure out is how much debt is too much debt? How much borrowing and how much money printing is too much? And the answer is we just simply don't know. The United States could last another 100, 200, or 300 years, and it could be a slow decline from where we're at today. Or there are ways that the United States could potentially slow down this process. Ray Dalio believes that this is just something that happens to global superpowers, and there really is nothing to prevent it, only things to slow it down. Like I said before, though, it's not going to be an outright fix. Spending is a problem for our entire country right now, both professionally from businesses, both federally from our government, and personally from consumers. Consumers are more in debt today than they pretty much ever have been. Our entire economy is extremely fragile, and that is a bad sign because one thing, like people not spending money, could lead to another. Businesses filing bankruptcy because they don't have incomes could lead to another. Less tax dollars for the United States government, and that forces them to just continue to print, devaluing our currency. Now look, there is a silver lining here. I know this was kind of doom and gloom, and there's a lot of crazy things going on in the world right now, but that doesn't mean that it has to have a negative effect on you, your finances, or your family. The first thing you can do to kind of dig yourself out of this financial hole is to stay up to date with everything going on in the business and financial world. Now, if you want a super easy way to do that, we're talking about everything going on 7 days a week over here on this channel. And if you want to subscribe, be sure to do that below before you go. The other thing you can do is to really kind of manage your money for any type of circumstances that come up in the United States, right? Whether we see a potential recession in the future, whether we potentially see an economic boom, whether inflation stays high or interest rates stay high in the future, you need a plan for all of these different circumstances, and you need a way to adapt. The only way that you can do that is to truly understand what is going on and understand how to manage your money. These are going to give you the tools that you need to be successful in any economy. And the last thing you can do is to continue to buy assets and continue to invest in things that are going to go up in value. Do your own due diligence here. Never listen to random people online. Make sure you're buying things that make sense for you and your financial plan. I would never give you advice on exactly what that is, but all I can tell you is there are things out there that are going to continue to be valuable and that are going to continue to make you money despite what is happening in the economy. And it's your job to find those things and invest accordingly. Nobody knows what's going to happen in the future, and there isn't one single person that can control any of it, but the only thing that you can't control is your own money. That is it for me, everybody. Be kind out there, and I'll see you all in the next one.